Dr. Anthony Fauci made headlines today after saying it will be open season for vaccines by April. He says any adults should be able to get a shot by then. This comes as officials worry the rollout is just too slow to stop the spread. Our City Stallworth met with an expert to hear how the vaccine rollout is going and whether or not it's crucial to reaching herd immunity in the U.S.
We knew that these first few months were going to be challenging. More people were going to want vaccine than we had vaccine available.
As new coronavirus variants originating from the UK, South Africa, and Brazil have all made their way to the U.S., Dr. Lamb says we're in a race between vaccine and variant.
You want to get as many people vaccinated as you can to give them some protection.
So far, vaccines are still effective against these new variants. He says it's not likely that we'll see a variant that none of our existing protections work against.
I think that likelihood is small. If that were to happen, the folks that develop vaccines, especially the mRNA vaccines, say that in about 8 weeks, they could have a vaccine that would provide protection for the new variant as well.
But what does herd immunity actually mean, and how do we get there?
So there are two ways you can get herd immunity. You have a natural immunity because you've gotten infected and have recovered, or you've been vaccinated. The goal is if you can vaccinate people and the number of vaccinations plus the number of people that have recovered from the virus, if you can reach that threshold, then you slow the spread and you bring everything under control.
What does that threshold look like? Dr. Lamb says experts aren't exactly seeing eye to eye on this number.
The numbers of how many people have to have herd immunity is a little tricky. There's no one calculation that everyone agrees on. So I've seen everywhere from 65 to 90% of the population has to have some form of immunity, one of those two options. So there's a broad range there.
Putting the Valley first, Sydney Stallworth, WZDX News.